3 days before the murder, he searched neck break. 2 days before, he searched the exact depth of the lake where her body was later found. The day before, nothing. He already had everything he needed. We know this exact timeline because every search he made was automatically saved, time-stamped, and linked to his account on a server he never once thought about. Every single person in this video made the same mistake. They sat alone in their homes, in what felt like total privacy, and typed their plans into a search bar. They thought no one was watching. They were wrong. And what investigators found when they came looking put every one of them away for life. Case 1. Casey Anthony. The Beautiful Life. Casey Anthony was 22 years old, fun-loving, and fiercely social. Her daughter Kaylee was 2, dark curls, gap-toothed smile, the kind of child that stops strangers in grocery stores. By all outward appearances, they were a young mother and daughter navigating life in Orlando, Florida, living with Casey's parents George and Cindy in a comfortable suburban home. On June 16, 2008, Kaylee Anthony was seen alive for the last time. And for the next 31 days, Casey Anthony told absolutely no one her daughter was missing. Not her parents, not the police, not her boyfriend. For 31 days, Casey went to nightclubs with friends. She entered a hot body competition at a local bar and won. She went shopping at Target and bought lingerie. She told her boyfriend she was staying at a friend's place, told her parents she was working, told anyone who asked about Kaylee that the little girl was with a babysitter. A woman named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, who investigators would later confirm had never met Casey or Kaylee in her life. She also, during those 31 days, got a tattoo on her left shoulder blade. The tattoo read Bella Vita, Italian for beautiful life. It was Kaylee's grandmother, Cindy Anthony, who finally called 911 on July 15, 2008. She had tracked Casey down after weeks of evasions and lies, finally located her with a boyfriend. And when she got into the car Casey had been driving, the smell hit her immediately. She told the 911 dispatcher that the car smelled like there had been a dead body in it. Investigators found trace evidence in the trunk consistent with human decomposition. They found traces of chloroform. They found a strand of hair with characteristics consistent with post-mortem root banding, meaning it had come from someone who was already dead. In December 2008, 6 months after Kaylee was last seen alive, her skeletal remains were discovered in a garbage bag in a wooded area less than a quarter mile from the Anthony family home. She had been there the entire time, decomposing in the Florida heat. That's while her mother entered nightclub photo contests and got tattoos celebrating the beautiful life. Duct tape was found adhered near the area of her skull's nose and mouth. Then investigators pulled the family computer, and the case became something else entirely. On March 17, 2008, 3 full months before Kaylee vanished, someone had used that computer to search the word chloroform. According to the prosecution's initial forensic analysis, that search had been conducted 84 times, and the computer also contained searches for how to make chloroform, neck breaking, household chemicals that make you pass out, death, and foolproof suffocation. The prosecution's theory was that Casey had used homemade chloroform to sedate Kaylee before suffocating her with duct tape, and that she had researched every step of the process months in advance. The defense went to war over the digital forensics. Defense attorney Jose Baez hammered the prosecution's computer expert on ultimately revealing that the forensic software used to detect those searches had contained a critical flaw, and that the actual number of chloroform searches may have been significantly lower than first reported. But other searches remained firmly on the record, undisputed. Baez offered the jury a completely different narrative, that Kaylee had drowned accidentally in the family pool. that George Anthony had discovered the body and panicked, and that Casey's bizarre behavior afterward was a trauma response rooted in years of sexual abuse she had suffered in silence. It was one of the most dramatic trials in American history. Media trucks lined the streets outside the Orlando courthouse for weeks. Nancy Grace covered it nightly with increasing fury. Spectators camped outside to get seats in the gallery. The nation watched and argued and chose sides with the kind of passion normally reserved for elections. On July 5, 2011, and after deliberating for approximately 10 hours, the jury returned a verdict. Not guilty of murder in the first degree. Not guilty of manslaughter. Guilty only of lying to law enforcement. The courtroom erupted. People watching live on television across the country screamed at their screens. The jurors, in subsequent interviews, explained that they simply could not establish cause of death beyond a reasonable doubt. Without knowing exactly how Kaylee died, and they could not convict her mother of a specific crime. Casey Anthony was released from jail 11 days later, wearing sunglasses, walking into a world that had largely decided she was guilty regardless of what 12 jurors had concluded. Kaylee Marie Anthony was 2 years old. She has never received justice. Her case remains one of the most discussed and debated in true crime history. Not because it ended with a satisfying verdict, but precisely because it didn't. The anger never faded. The searches never went away. And somewhere in the record of that family computer, the questions Casey typed in the quiet of a March night still sit exactly where she left them. The beautiful life cost her daughter everything, and the internet still remembers every word. Case 2. Justin Ross Harris. The father, who already knew the morning of June 18, 2014, started with breakfast. Justin Ross Harris took his 22-month-old son, Cooper, to a Chick-fil-A near their Marietta, Georgia home. They sat across from each other in a booth. Cooper ate. By every account of that morning, it looked completely ordinary. A father and his toddler son sharing a meal before the workday. Then Harris drove to his office, parked, carried Cooper's diaper bag inside, and walked into his workplace. Cooper remained strapped in his car seat in the back of the vehicle. The car sat in a parking lot in the Georgia summer heat. And Harris sat at his desk for the next 7 hours while his son died. When Harris returned to the car at the end of the workday and found Cooper's body, the response he showed was, by witness accounts, absolute anguish. He pulled his son out of the car and laid him on the ground. He screamed. Bystanders began CPR while emergency services were called. Cooper was pronounced dead at the scene. Harris sat on a nearby curb and rocking back and forth, appearing to be in complete shock. But investigators began to notice things. His account of the morning had inconsistencies. His demeanor shifted in ways that were difficult to categorize but difficult to ignore. And when the warrants came back for his phone and computer records, the case transformed completely. On the morning of June 18th, on 2014, the morning Cooper died, Justin Ross Harris had searched the internet for information about how long it takes a child to die when left in a hot car. That morning, not the day before, not a week earlier out of some abstract parental anxiety. That specific morning, before he went into the office, he had looked up the answer to the question that was already being answered in the parking lot outside. His computer records from prior days showed he had also been reading news articles about children dying in hot vehicles, including detailed reporting on the physiological process of how heat kills a child. On his work computer, he had visited a Reddit community devoted to child-free living. Adults who had chosen not to have children and who discussed and celebrated that lifestyle. His phone records showed that during the hours Cooper sat dying in the parking lot, Harris had been actively exchanging sexually explicit messages with multiple women, including a girl who was underage. Investigators also found that Harris had been living a comprehensive double life. Secret profiles on adult websites, ongoing affairs, a sexual and social existence that existed entirely outside his marriage and family. Prosecutors argued that Harris had not forgotten his son in the car. They argued he had made a deliberate decision and researched the outcome in advance. The defense brought in neuroscientists and memory experts who testified that forgetting a child in a vehicle is a documented cognitive failure that can occur even in devoted and loving parents. That the brain, under certain conditions of routine and distraction, can genuinely fail to register that a child was placed in a car. They argued the prosecution had taken a devastating accidental tragedy and used Harris's moral failures as a husband to convince a jury he was a murderer. In 2016, the jury convicted him of murder. Life without parole. In 2022, the Georgia Court of Appeals overturned the conviction on the grounds that evidence of Harris's extramarital activities had been so prejudicial that it had tainted the jury's ability to evaluate the actual murder charge fairly. A new trial was ordered. The case continues to move through the legal system. Cooper Harris does not get a new trial. He was 22 months old. He was strapped into his car seat on a summer morning in Georgia. And the search history of the man who left him there showed that someone had already looked up exactly what was about to happen to him. Case 3. Melanie McGuire. She built a murder manual in her browser. In the spring of 2004, fishermen working the waters near Virginia Beach began pulling something unexpected from the Chesapeake Bay. Suitcases. One came up near the shore. Then another, I discovered miles away. A third was found floating further out. Each suitcase was sealed with duct tape. Each one was heavier than it should have been. Inside those suitcases, distributed across separate containers and spread across miles of open water, were the dismembered remains of Bill McGuire. He had been shot twice. He had been cut into pieces with what forensic experts described as significant anatomical knowledge. The dismemberment showed understanding of how a body is constructed. His arms, his legs, his torso, all packaged separately, all placed in different suitcases, all dropped at different points in the bay, apparently in the belief that tidal patterns would scatter them far enough that they would never all be found. All of them were found. Bill McGuire's wife was Melanie, a registered fertility nurse from New Jersey, educated and composed. She cooperated with investigators initially, answered questions calmly, and projected the grief of a woman whose husband had simply vanished. She did not appear to panic. She did not appear to sweat. Colleagues and neighbors who knew her described a woman who seemed to be managing the situation with remarkable control. The computer told a different story. Prosecutors who subpoenaed Melanie McGuire's internet records found what they subsequently described in open court as a murder manual. In the days leading up to Bill McGuire's disappearance, Melanie had searched how to commit an undetectable murder. She had searched fatal insulin doses. She was a nurse with legitimate access to medical supplies and the pharmacological knowledge to use them. She had searched New Jersey gun laws. Bill had been shot twice before being dismembered. She had searched information about how to acquire a firearm through channels that bypassed background checks. She had searched specific information about the Chesapeake Bay, including its tidal patterns, the behavior of submerged objects in different seasons, and the depth and current characteristics of various points along its length. She had also, investigators discovered, been in a passionate and consuming affair with the doctor she worked for. A man she was deeply in love with and wanted to be with permanently. Bill McGuire was the obstacle, and Melanie McGuire had done her research. At trial, Melanie McGuire took the witness stand in her own defense. She was articulate, measured, and composed. She denied everything. She told the jury the searches had innocent explanations, that the evidence was entirely circumstantial, that investigators had constructed a narrative around her because they had no other suspects. She sat in that courtroom and looked like a woman telling the truth. In 2007, the jury convicted her of first-degree murder and sentenced her to life in prison. She has appealed multiple times. From her cell at the Edna Mahan Correctional Facility in Clinton, New Jersey, she continues to give interviews maintaining her innocence, speaking clearly and calmly about the case, always suggesting that the real story has not yet been told. The real story was told in a search bar. How to commit an undetectable murder. Typed by a woman who thought she had done everything right. Recovered by investigators who knew exactly where to look. Case 4. Robert Petrick. He Googled the lake before she was dead. Robert Petrick had constructed his entire adult life on a foundation of lies, fraudulent identities, criminal convictions he had concealed, a carefully maintained false history that he had presented to his wife Janine as the truth of who he was. When Janine Petrick discovered the truth in 2003, she did not stay quiet. She began consulting attorneys. She started building documentation. She was going to expose him, professionally, legally, publicly. And Robert Petrick understood clearly what that would mean for every version of himself he had spent years protecting. On November 5th, 2003, Janine Petrick was found dead in their Raleigh, North Carolina home. Her husband told investigators she had choked on food at breakfast and died before he could get help to her. He said grief and panic had overtaken him. He said he made the worst decision of his life. He said he put her in his car, drove her body to Falls Lake in North Carolina, and submerged it in the water because he was not thinking clearly and did not know what else to do. He delivered this story with what appeared to be genuine remorse. He seemed broken. He seemed lost. Then investigators pulled his computer records and the story shattered. In the days preceding Janine's death, Robert Petrick had searched neck snap. He had searched neck break. He had researched the specific mechanics of how cervical spine trauma causes death. The angle required, the force involved, what the resulting injury looks like at autopsy, and how it differs from other causes of death. He had, in other words, researched his method. And then there was the second set of searches. The ones that made the judge in the subsequent trial describe them publicly as the most damning digital evidence he had ever encountered in a courtroom. Robert Petrick had searched the specific depth of Falls Lake. He had searched the water temperature at that time of year. He had looked up information about how a submerged body behaves in water of varying depths and temperatures, whether it sinks, stays submerged, or resurfaces over time. He had researched the exact lake where he later claimed he impulsively dumped his wife's body in a moment of confused grief. He had researched that lake before she was dead. He had chosen his disposal site before the crime took place, confirmed its suitability, and noted its characteristics. This was not a man who panicked beside a choked wife and made a terrible, spontaneous decision. This was a man who had selected his location in advance, verified it was appropriate for his purposes, and proceeded according to a plan he had developed while Janine was still alive and still talking to lawyers. Robert Petrick was convicted of first-degree murder in 2005 and sentenced to life in prison. At sentencing, the presiding judge addressed the courtroom specifically about the search history, stating that in his judicial career, he had never seen digital evidence demonstrate premeditation with such clarity, precision, and devastating specificity. Janine Petrick had been trying to expose a man whose entire life was built on deception. He had searched her death site before killing her, and the internet held the record of exactly when he did it. Case 5. Medina. he needed to check the law first. Derek Medina wanted an audience. He had self-published multiple books about relationships, happiness, and how to live a better life. He had a YouTube channel where he dispensed advice. He maintained active profiles across social media platforms, building a following, crafting a persona, treating his everyday existence like content worth broadcasting. On August 8, 2013, he posted something to Facebook that no platform was built to handle. That morning, Medina and his wife Jennifer Alfonso argued in their Miami home. What followed will be detailed in a moment, but first, the search. Because hours before Jennifer was killed, Derek Medina had opened a browser on his computer and typed the following question into a search engine. Is it illegal to kill your wife? Hours before. He had needed to look it up. He had sat at a desk or a table or wherever he kept his computer and typed that exact question, as if the legal status of murdering his spouse was a variable he needed to resolve before proceeding. He treated the decision the way a person might verify business hours or check whether a restaurant takes reservations. He asked the internet. He waited for an answer. Then he shot Jennifer Alfonso multiple times in their home. What followed became one of the most disturbing intersections of violence and social media in the platform's history. Medina photographed Jennifer's body where it lay on the kitchen floor. He then uploaded that photograph to his Facebook page with a caption addressed directly to his followers. I'm going to prison or death sentence for killing my wife. Love you guys. Miss you guys. Take care, Facebook people. You will see me in the news. He submitted his own confession to the internet. He had told his audience he was going to be famous and then provided the evidence that would make it true. The photograph remained on Facebook for approximately 5 hours before the platform removed it. In those 5 hours, it was seen and shared by thousands of people. Reports to law enforcement came quickly. Medina had not fled. He was still at the house when officers arrived. He was arrested without incident. At trial, Medina claimed self-defense. He testified that Jennifer had attacked him, that she had come at him with a knife, that he had been genuinely afraid and had fired to protect himself. His attorneys worked to present Jennifer as volatile and dangerous. They argued the search history had been mischaracterized and that the post-shooting Facebook post was the act of a man in psychological shock, not a premeditated killer. The jury convicted him in 2015 of second-degree murder. Life in prison. Derek Medina continues to give jailhouse interviews. He maintains calmly and consistently that he acted in self-defense and that the truth of what happened that morning has been misrepresented. The search, time-stamped hours before Jennifer died, maintains something else. He needed to know if it was illegal. He looked it up. And then he did it anyway. The Case 6. Mark Jensen. She left him a letter from the other side before the detectives arrived. Before anyone had pulled a single file from the family computer. Before any forensic expert had analyzed anything. Julie Jensen had already solved her own murder. She just needed someone to open an envelope. Julie Jensen lived in Pleasant Prairie, Wisconsin with her husband Mark and their 2 sons. She had been frightened of her husband long enough to take a precaution that most people would never have the presence of mind to consider. She wrote a letter to a neighbor, a handwritten, signed, dated document, and handed it over with a single instruction. If anything ever happens to me, open this and give it to the police. On December 3, 1998, Cindy Jensen was found dead at home. The cause of death was initially unclear. Mark told investigators she had been ill and that her health had been deteriorating, that her death, while devastating, had not been entirely unexpected given her recent condition. He was composed. He cooperated. He grieved in the way grieving is supposed to look. Then the neighbor opened the letter. "If I die," Julie had written, "it may not be an accident. I pray I'm wrong. If anything happens to me, please look into Mark first." She had named him. From beyond her own death, until she had pointed at her killer by name and asked investigators to look carefully. They did. And when they examined the family computer, they found what her letter had told them they would. Someone using that computer had spent months researching ethylene glycol, the active compound in antifreeze, in meticulous and specific detail. The searches covered lethal dosages based on body weight. They covered the timeline from ingestion to death. They covered whether ethylene glycol could be detected in standard toxicology screenings, and if not, what level of testing would be required to find it. They covered whether the substance could be dissolved into food or liquid without significantly altering the taste or appearance. Julie's autopsy confirmed antifreeze poisoning. She had been given it slowly, over time, in doses calibrated to sicken rather than immediately kill, building toward a death that would look like a prolonged illness. There was one more layer to the search history that made it uniquely horrifying. Mark Jensen had also researched the symptom progression of ethylene glycol poisoning. What a person experiences at each stage of the dying process. What the physical signs look like, how long each phase lasts. He had not just researched how to kill his wife. He had researched what dying from what he gave her would feel like, stage by stage. He watched her deteriorate while knowing clinically what was happening to her, because he had read the documentation in advance. The case became one of the most legally complex in Wisconsin history. Mark Jensen's defense fought for years to have Julie's letter excluded from trial on hearsay grounds, arguing a dead woman's written statement violated his constitutional right to confront his accusers. The courts debated the issue at every level. The letter was ultimately allowed. In 2008, Mark Jensen was convicted of first-degree intentional homicide and sentenced to life. In 2021, a court granted him a new trial. In 2023, a second jury convicted him again. Julie Jensen predicted her own murder with devastating accuracy. She prepared for it methodically, handed her evidence to a neighbor, and trusted that someone would eventually follow her instructions. And the search history and the letter together built a case that has now survived 2 full trials and more than 2 decades of legal challenges. She still won, both times. Case 7, Jonchuck. He asked God for permission. There are cases in this world that challenge every framework you use to understand human behavior. Cases where the facts are so stark and the act so incomprehensible that you find yourself reading the details and then sitting quietly for a moment, unable to find a foothold in the logic of it. Jonchuck is that case. By the first week of January 2015, people around Jonchuck had noticed something was wrong. His behavior had become erratic and strange, fragmented speech, bizarre references, a disconnection from ordinary conversation that felt less like eccentricity and more like something breaking. He had been reported to authorities days before what happened. A police officer had encountered him on the night of January 8th and found his behavior concerning, but released him without fully understanding the danger he posed. Jonchuck drove through Tampa Bay in the early hours of the morning with his 5-year-old daughter Phoebe in the back seat. She was wearing a pink shirt. The drive took him to the Dick Mizner Bridge, a structure spanning Tampa Bay with a 70-foot drop to the water below. Jonchuck stopped the car on the bridge. He got out. He went to the back door and lifted Phoebe out. A police officer who had been following his erratic driving for miles pulled up behind him at that exact moment. The officer got out of his vehicle. He saw what was happening. He screamed for Jonchuck to stop. Jonchuck dropped his daughter from the railing into the water 70 feet below. The officer dove from the bridge, attempting to save her. He survived. Phoebe's body was recovered from Tampa Bay. She had died on impact, and when investigators pulled the search history from the hours before Jonchuck drove to that bridge, they found 2 searches that still produce a kind of stunned silence in any room where they are read aloud. He had searched, "Can God forgive murder?" He had searched, "If I kill my daughter, will I go to heaven?" He had been asking for divine permission. He had been seeking religious clearance, confirmation from a spiritual authority that what he was about to do to his own child would not close the door on his own salvation. Some part of his mind, even fractured and deteriorating, understood well enough what he was about to do that it felt it needed to be forgiven in advance. The trial that followed was among the most difficult in Florida's recent history. The defense presented multiple psychiatric experts who testified that Jonchuck had been in a severe psychotic state. Paranoid schizophrenic, completely disconnected from reality, operating inside a delusional framework that had recast the act as protection rather than murder. Several mental health professionals testified that Jonchuck had genuinely believed he was saving Phoebe from a world of evil, that his illness had so completely rewritten his perception of reality that he could not have known what he was doing was wrong. In 2019, the jury rejected the insanity defense. Jonchuck was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But those 2 searches remain. They tell us that somewhere inside whatever was happening in his mind, enough remained intact to know he needed forgiveness. So he typed the questions into a phone or a computer in the dark hours before he drove to that bridge. He asked. He waited for an answer. And then he went anyway. Phoebe Jonchuck was 5 years old. The police officer who jumped 70 feet trying to save her has spoken publicly about what that night cost him. There is no version of this case that ends without wait. And the wait begins with those 2 searches. Typed in the quiet of a night, no one who knew Phoebe will ever stop mourning. On Case 8, Jesse Alvarez. He searched how to delete his searches. There is a particular kind of criminal arrogance that stands apart from all the others. The arrogance of a man who searches how to delete my Google search history while actively planning a murder on the same platform, using the same account, with the same automatic backup running in the background that has been running since he first opened his browser. Jesse Alvarez had dated Amy Gambara on and off for roughly 4 years, between 2015 and 2019. The relationship ended. Amy moved forward with her life. She met Mario Fierro, a 37-year-old Catholic schoolteacher in San Diego, loved by his students, respected by his colleagues, described by everyone who knew him as genuinely warm and kind. Mario proposed to Amy in 2020. She said yes. The engagement was posted on Facebook. Jesse Alvarez saw the post, or what followed over the next several months was documented almost entirely through his search history. A record that investigators would later describe as one of the most complete pre-crime digital trails they had ever examined. Alvarez searched how to kill your ex's fiancé. He searched hiring hitmen. He searched how to kill someone with a handgun. He researched Mario Fierro directly, his neighborhood, the Catholic school where he worked. What investigators believe were attempts to establish his daily schedule and routine. He searched tactical information about carrying out a shooting. He searched information about avoiding detection afterward. And then, at some point, apparently looking at what he had typed and understanding how it appeared, he searched how to delete Google search history. He was trying to erase the evidence of his planning. On Google, using the same Google account on the same device, on the same network that had been logging every query with a timestamp since the moment he typed the first one. The search for how to delete his history was itself logged, backed up, and preserved with the same automatic precision as every other search he had made. Every single word he had typed was still there. The deletion attempt became just another entry in the record of what he had been thinking. On the morning of February 1st, 2021, Mario Fierro left his home in the North Park neighborhood of San Diego to walk to work at the Catholic school where he taught. Jesse Alvarez was outside. Mario Fierro was shot and killed on his own doorstep, steps from his front door, on a Tuesday morning in the neighborhood where he lived. His students left flowers at the school for weeks. His colleagues held vigils. Amy Gambara lost her fiancé because a man she had once dated could not accept that she had chosen someone else and built a life that did not include him. At trial in 2024, prosecutors placed Alvarez's search history on the courtroom screen and read it aloud, entry by entry, in chronological order. The searches began with jealousy. They progressed to research. They became a plan. Each entry landed in that courtroom with the weight of everything Mario Fierro never got to do. Jesse Alvarez was convicted of first-degree murder. Life in prison. Every word he typed in private, every search he thought was gone, was recovered in its entirety. Time-stamped, complete, waiting, as it always had been, for someone to come and look. Case 9, James Seevakumaran. The day the search history saved everyone. This last case is different from every case on this list. There is no victim to name, no family destroyed by a loss that cannot be undone, no memorial, no funeral, no community trying to piece itself back together. This case is here because of what the search history revealed before the crime, and because one person with a phone made the call that stopped it. James Seevakumaran was a 30-year-old student at the University of Central Florida in Orlando, living in a dormitory in Tower 1 during the spring of 2013. Over the preceding months, he had become increasingly isolated, withdrawn from any social connections, falling behind financially, facing the loss of his meal plan and imminent eviction from his room. He existed, by every account, at the extreme margins of campus life, disconnected from the world immediately around him. But he was not idle. He was planning. For months, Seevakumaran had been conducting comprehensive research into mass casualty attacks. He had searched extensively into previous mass shootings, the weapons used, the tactical decisions made, the body counts achieved, and critically, the points at which each attack had been stopped and what had enabled intervention. He was not studying these events out of morbid curiosity. He was studying them the way a professional studies a discipline, trying to understand what had gone wrong for others, what had made their plans fail, so that he could avoid those specific failures in his own. He had also been acting on his research. He had legally purchased multiple firearms. He had stockpiled hundreds of rounds of ammunition, and he had constructed 4 homemade explosive devices. He had created a handwritten tactical timeline, a page-by-page, step-by-step schedule for the attack, including timing, location, and movement. He had purchased a GoPro camera in its original packaging. He wanted to document what he did. He had planned an audience. On the night of March 18, 2013, Seevakumaran activated the opening phase of his plan. He pulled the fire alarm in Tower 1. The alarm would cause residents to evacuate into a single corridor and funnel into an outdoor courtyard. A concentrated, partially enclosed group of people with limited exit options. Students began moving toward the exits. His roommate, Arabo Babakani, was in the room when the alarm went off. He heard something from Seevakumaran's side of the dormitory that alarmed him. Sounds he could not fully identify, but recognized instinctively as wrong. Babakani locked himself in his room and called 911. He told the dispatcher what he heard. Police arrived on scene within 3 minutes. As officers moved into the building and Seevakumaran became aware of their approach, he took his own life. When police entered the room, they found 4 homemade explosive devices, hundreds of rounds of ammunition, the detailed written attack plan, the weapons, and the GoPro still sealed in its packaging. And the students who had evacuated into the courtyard, who had moved, as planned, into the concentrated outdoor space where the attack was intended to begin, had no idea how close they had been. They filed back to their rooms when the all-clear was given. The search history reconstructed the entire arc of what had been building for months. Every research query, time-stamped and preserved, showed the evolution from initial curiosity to detailed tactical planning. Investigators could trace how the plan had developed, what sources had informed it, how he had tried to design around the failure points of previous attacks. Arabo Babakani made one phone call. That call, and the 3-minute response time it enabled, is the reason this case is about a plan that failed rather than a tragedy that unfolded. An unknowable number of people returned to their dormitory rooms that night and went to sleep without understanding how close they had come to something irreversible. Sometimes the search history tells you what was planned. Sometimes the plan fails. And when it does, it is worth remembering that the people who stopped it were paying attention when it mattered most.